They've really gone and done it now. I never really expected to be revisiting this dead horse, but OWI has made a couple of terrible decisions lately regarding helicopters. Those of you who have been keeping an eye on Squad's development know exactly where I'm going with this, but I want to take one step back and talk about the introduction of Marines and the Venom. And this absolutely terrible idea right here. For those of you who do not know, when you fly above a certain altitude in Squad, the fog on the map basically vanishes. And past a certain range, no real cover renders in, and you can pretty much see the flat terrain of the entire map. Now what does render in is enemy vehicles and enemy structures within 1500 meters, as well as enemy radios at any range. This has led to a fundamental issue with transport pilots being able to hit altitude ceilings and spot targets that they pretty much shouldn't be able to see otherwise with impunity because none of the weapon systems can actually see them. Whether or not you consider this to be a problem or a tactic is debatable, but obviously OWI considers it to be a problem since they have made several attempts to fix it by lowering altitude limits and changing the way the fog works. So why the fuck did they add a helicopter with a scout camera? The only logic I can see is that perhaps they wanted to add it as an actual feature rather than trying to fix it as a bug. But in doing so, they have to consider the balance of the game. And then they only gave it to 2 Blue 4 factions with no counter on the enemy team. And it's pretty much impossible to counter by direct ground units since you can do everything from main base. You can see the entire map from directly above your main base. And because all of the extremely long-range weapons in Squad, like ATGMs, have artificially reduced ranges of some 12 to 1500 meters, can't remember off the top of my head, there's really no counter to this. Helicopters are already flying tanks, which is something I have complained about extensively in the past, and now they're flying tanks that can sit kilometers away from relevant areas and still spot every single vehicle and radio on the map with relative ease. To give you an idea of how powerful this is my most recent match analysis video in which I'm doing exactly this and explaining the way it works, and I received a lot of comments on that video, as well as outside of that video, about how I was essentially exploiting bugs and doing something that OWI never intended. Now I can maybe see that point if I was flying a transport helicopter to flight ceiling and looking out my left window and trying to spot vehicles, but this is a recon camera on a helicopter. I did what you are supposed to do. I flew high and stayed away from danger. And because the game is so fundamentally broken and bugged when it comes to spotting in this way, the results were extremely more effective than they should have been because of the shortcomings of the game. Can you think of any other video game where using a scout helicopter to scout things might draw a fuzzy line where some people actually believe you're exploiting glitches? Because I certainly can't. Now this lapse in judgment is definitely in line with every other bad decision they've made regarding helicopters since well before release, but they didn't stop there because with this most recent update they stealth dropped in an attack helicopter. Now supposedly they did this by accident, but they've decided to leave it in for this patch and see what happens essentially, judge the feedback of the community. So just how overpowered is this thing? Well, it's on Scorpo Invasion v3, and the defenders are not allowed to build ATGMs and do not have tanks, which means immediately the 2 most capable counters to helicopters are immediately out. When it comes to flying helicopters, I think I get shot down by tanks and ATGMs more than anything else, probably around 80% of my deaths. And that's because autocannons just aren't that scary. You need to be able to one-shot it from range with a high velocity or guidable projectile. When it comes to 30 mils or 14.5, usually you can dance around those things in a helicopter. It's slightly harder to dance around the higher rate of fire BMP-2 autocannon, but in the end of the day, this is an invasion layer and all they get is a 30 mil BTR. So how do those two compare? Well, normally in most video games there wouldn't be a direct time to kill comparison, but Squad has ridiculously bloated health pools for all vehicles in the game, and plays more like World of Tanks, so we need to do a proper time to kill test with a helicopter versus a BTR. Which sounds absurd saying it, but it's what we did in testing because that's just how Squad works. The helicopter's Hydras are most likely just copy-pasted projectiles from the MEA's rocket pods, and because they don't fire fast enough, they don't really pose that much of a threat to most vehicles. The main weapon of this helicopter is going to be the Rotary 50, which has a weapon that's typically balanced around 500 RPM, firing at significantly higher RPM against vehicles that are often vulnerable to it. I honestly didn't know what to expect going into this, but I had my suspicions that the helicopter might actually have a time-to-kill advantage over certain vehicles, and it does. First up, we have Scout Car versus Helicopter. Everybody hedge your bets. As you can see, the helicopter started firing slightly earlier, so it's not the greatest test, but the helicopter had around 15% of its HP left after this, so in reality it would be pretty damn close. Now with that, you should be able to predict what's going to happen with the BTR-80 versus the helicopter, but here's that test. As a quick note, thank you to Tactical Trigonometry for letting us use your custom server. The BTR ended with about 25% of its HP left. Next, we have the 30mm using AP versus helicopter, not aiming for modules. Helicopter has around 5% of its health left and is burning. And finally, the real test, BTR-82HE versus helicopter. BTR ended this one with about 20% of its HP left. So what's the conclusion then? Well, congrats. OWI did it. They managed to make a helicopter not better than an APC. That was honestly something I wasn't sure they were going to be capable of doing when it came to balancing these things, but they've managed it at the very least that much. But in the end, what the fuck does it matter? This thing has a scout camera. You just fly to altitude ceiling, you can see every vehicle on the map, you take a note of where the 30mm is, maybe take a note of where the BTR-80 is, because you don't necessarily want to tangle with that either, and then you just dive in on every single exposed logi, and there's nothing that the enemy team can do about it. Cool. Attack helicopters. Now this is the part where everyone's railing me because yes, whatever, it was a mistake, they put it on a layer, they didn't mean to, they're just leaving it in for a patch, they don't want to make everyone re-download the game all over again, but honestly, I am genuinely afraid when they say that they're putting in this and looking for player feedback, that they're going to see the 3 or 4 clips of people all excited because they blew up a truck on Reddit with the helicopter and assume that it's a good addition because of that, while putting absolutely no thought into anything revolving around higher level play, or even just average gameplay, and the general balance of the game, as well as the happiness of the community that actually pays attention to that shit, rather than just being excited because, ooh, there's a cool asset shooting rockets from the sky. I'm sorry if I sound particularly cynical this video, but they just keep on amazing me with how low they're willing to go with how shit helicopters are in this game, and how they just keep on adding more functionality and features to them that are completely broken rather than actually taking a look and fixing the core issues. Anyway, if you've seen this video and you agree with what I'm saying, please leave some kind of feedback to OWI, whether that's through their Discord or through Reddit or through forums or however you have to do it, because I really do not want to see the mindless masses get this pushed into the game. I think that would be very bad for the health of the game overall, and at this point I can honestly see it happening.